And welcome back. It's time to talk politics. We are joined now to our political roundtable discussion. KTV's lead Capitol reporter Janelle Lilly, Rex Nelson, Political Animals Club president of Little Rock, Central Arkansas, and John Brummett, political columnist with the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Let's begin. It was kind of the big story of the week, early in the week, was the private option passed. It's been a point of contention for this whole legislative session. Janelle, it was a little bit climactic. It was a little bit anticlimactic. They got there on Tuesday.
Well, it's anticlimactic because the whole 4 weeks that we've been there, right? They've been saying it's going to pass, it's going to pass. You've got the governor, you've got the speaker, and there was no other way to go with those numbers, you know, when you broke them down. Climactic in the sense that you never knew which day it was. So you'd show up to the Capitol each day wondering whether it was going to happen or not. And when Tuesday came, you weren't even sure then. They convened at 1:30, immediately took a recess, and there was a meeting in the speaker's office. There was a meeting down in the cafeteria wrangling those votes. What the reporters were hearing is they were up to 74, but needed the 75 on the table. And it was climactic in the sense that when you saw Slinkard's name go green and then Carnine's name, you just were like, oh, they got it.
So, John, the supporters are obviously jubilant that it passed because it then goes to the governor, gets signed into law. What's the reaction from the opponents of the private option? How did they handle that?
Sort of resignation. They, like everyone else, figured it was going to pass eventually. And sort of, they're waiting to say, they told us so. They're waiting to say, well, this thing is just going to be more expensive. Now we're going to see that the budget is made, that there's going to be a great run on money. And lo and behold, the next day, that $92 million in surplus funds they tried to spend. Just sort of we'll wait and see that this is going to be the most horrible mess you've ever seen, and you'll be sorry.
And some of the people that voted for it are in that camp as well. I mean, that was the essence of Kim Hammer's speech for the bill, was that he's waiting for something to go wrong.
Yeah, Rex?
I don't think it is a coincidence that we finally passed this thing right when the filing period was closing.
Exactly.
You know, and a lot of us may have seen that coming early, and that a lot of people were worried, on the Republican side certainly, with primary competition, somebody coming at them from their right. And once that filing period is over, once they know they don't have that primary opponent, then it becomes a lot easier.
I thought the most interesting thing was after the vote, John Seelig asked him about their enrollment targets. You're going to try to get a lot of people enrolled by July 1 before the Nate Bell Amendment takes effect. He essentially said the Nate Bell Amendment was ineffectual. He said, we don't do that much direct promotion anyway. This is all word of mouth. This is through churches. We expect by the time we sit here next year at this time, we'll have full enrollment of the full 250,000 people, which means it's going to be very difficult for a new governor and a new legislature of any party, of any persuasion, to undo it at that time.
Yeah. The navigators are the big thing that the Nate Bell Amendment
Now, of course,
impacts.
earlier there was a huge advertising campaign plan that was pulled back.
Well, they just couldn't get the funding for it.
Right.
Let's talk about how this plays out in the political primaries now. As you indicated, the candidate filing period has closed. The action is on the GOP side. I think we've got a graphic here to just kind of show how some of this plays out here. When you look at the races here, the federal races, the statewide races, the state Senate, the Arkansas House, there's 18 contested primaries on the GOP side, only 4 on the Democratic side, and one of those is the governor's race. So you got no action on the Democratic side. How does the private option and how does that lineup that I just presented there, Rex, play out in the primaries?
You know, we've done a 180 from the Arkansas that John Brummett and I grew up in. Of course, that was a long time ago when John Brummett and I grew up. But, you know,
yet grown up.
For decades, though, you know, all the action was in the Democratic primary, the old tantamount to. Now you look at these numbers and you see, I think the total was like 132 Republicans that filed for state and federal offices, only 88 Democrats filed for state and federal offices. This is not the Arkansas that a lot of us knew, and it's all happened since the 2010 election cycle. I mean, whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican, you've got to admit we're living in a very historic time in Arkansas politics. We're seeing a transformation that I think is going to last for decades.
The issue is whether we're having more Republican primaries simply because the Republican nomination is now the big thing to have. The Republican Party is the one that's in charge, it's vibrant, Or is this a proliferation of specific battles over the private option? That'll be interesting to see. Some of the races, we know the people are challenging incumbents on that basis. It'll be interesting to see Missy Irwin's race, how John Burris does for the open Senate race with somebody opposing him, and the activity of this group, Conduit for America, which was formed. It's not the Koch brothers, it's to the right of the Koch brothers.
Right.
And they're very much against the private option. So I think it's a combination. The Republican Party is where it's at. We're in the middle of a Republican revolution, so their primary attracts more people, but the subtext, which may be the main text, is the private option.
Let's talk about the Democratic primary, Janelle, because Mike Ross has a primary opponent now, and I think this has some interesting ramifications here. I think you're the only reporter who's interviewed his Democratic opponent, Lynette Bryant. Why did she get in?
She actually got in for an unusual reason. It surprised me. It's because she's a big Mark Pryor supporter, and she believes that by Mike Ross vacating his seat, he allowed someone else like Tom Cotton to come into Ascension, get the attention that he has on the national stage, and be a real challenger for Mark Pryor's seat. She felt that Mike Ross, if he wanted to be governor, he should have stayed where he was and then ascended that way, and she felt that it was irresponsible on his behalf.
So with this low Democratic primary in terms of turnout here, I think you got so many uncontested races that it's going to be a low Democratic primary turnout, maybe the lowest we've ever seen in history. Mike Ross has to win by a convincing margin, I think, or else he looks weak going into the general election. Does that match up against Lynette Bryant? I don't think he loses, but could it play?
I think he wins convincingly.
But could he?
But what is convincing? Bill Clinton beat Monroe Swarslow 69-31 in such a situation in 1980, and everybody said, "Oh, he's finished. If he could only beat that guy by a third." How do you define success? How much does he beat Miss Bryant by? That's interesting. That she's mad at him, to spite him for.
She just felt that she could no longer vote for him. She felt that, in some ways he had betrayed the party.
I have been at Democratic functions and had the opportunity to meet her. She's very impressive. Very impressive woman.
I felt the same way.
And a major Hillary supporter.
And she came up with the filing fee
So,
too.
so John, where do in a primary, where do the anti-Ross votes come from? From the left of him? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes. Yes. And that's, in other words, we're dealing with a small group
very
of
small
people.
group. Yeah.
But sort of disaffected liberals who can't stand this whole Democratic theme of to get elected by being Republican light, and who will want to cast a vote for, and maybe some African American votes, which also are those to the left as well. I really, that's the question. What is his target? How much does he need to win by to avoid the appearance of being weakened?
Well, there'll be some comparison to how well Asa Hutchinson does in his primary against Curtis Coleman, too, so those comparisons are going to be invited. All right, listen, we're out of time for our roundtable discussion here, but let's carry it online for our viewers. So stick around, you can catch more of our roundtable discussion. We're going to talk about the Mark Pryor, Tom Cotton skirmish this past week. You can catch it online at talkbusiness.net or ketv.com after this word from our sponsors.
As Arkansas's population grows, so do our energy demands. But with the right mix of resources, reliable, affordable power will always be a reality. These resources are all around us in our rivers, blowing through our trees, even right below our feet. The answer isn't focusing on one resource, it's embracing them all. The electric cooperatives of Arkansas know that a balanced approach to power builds our communities and powers our dreams. Visit themixmatters.com and see why there's power in knowledge.
Welcome back to the online version of our Web Extra Political Roundtable. So let's pick up where we left off here and talk about just a completely different subject, but it was a big kind of skirmish this past week. Janelle, you kind of framed the debate for us. Mark Pryor, Tom Cotton. I think it's easy to say they had a skirmish this week. I could even use the military reference there.
You could use the military reference, and I do have the quote with me. Mark Pryor, when asked a question about Tom Cotton's military service and whether or not he feels that that is a good launching ground for his run for Senate, he answered back and said, I think that's part of the sense of entitlement that he gives off. It's almost like I served my country, therefore let me into the Senate.
Was he talking about Cotton's qualifications for the Senate, or was he talking about his military qualifications? You've diced and sliced this thing.
Doesn't require much dice and slice. He's not critiquing Mr. Cotton as a soldier. He's not talking about his performance in the military. He is not dismissing or disparaging, obviously. In fact, to the contrary, he said, I have great respect. Of course, he is saying, if this is the so, and that was because of the framing of the question, because he had said this guy hadn't done anything in his time in Congress, and then the reporter said, well, what about the military as a commendation for the office? And he's saying that alone does not qualify one for the Senate. Just as Tom Cotton had said, Chuck Hagel's military record didn't qualify him to be defense secretary. That's all he said, but he used that word, entitlement. Well, that's a red flag to all the anti-spending conservatives. Well, somehow we've got Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and probably the private option and food stamps and WIC and all of that messed up in this deal because he used this word entitlement. They keep coming back, entitlement. He simply used a word that's sort of a flashpoint in political debate.
Did Pryor step in it, or did Pryor just could have handled it a little bit better?
You know, they wanted this grand narrative of this guy, yes, he grew up in Arkansas, but he's been gone for years. He parachuted in here. He uses outside money. Now he's trying to grab one of our 2 Senate seats, and they hadn't had that much luck with that so far. So I think that Senator Pryor had to turn up the heat to try to get that narrative rolling a little more, and that's what he was attempting to do with these comments. And they may have indeed backfired.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the issue was with the word entitlement, which of course is an emotive word. You know, as a journalist, I truly try to stay away from assuming I know what other people's feelings are. I mean, you can certainly recognize joy and grief, but other than that, it's very difficult. You go from basically giving your own opinion to giving the opinion of another person when you use emotive words.
I think that we're going to see a lot of these skirmishes, though. This is going to be about a week.
This one will be long since forgotten, and we're going to have these bi-weekly, fortnightly.
It's going to give John plenty of columns. He's going to love it. Easy. More time on the tennis courts this summer, John. Easy columns.
It's fascinating to watch these partisans in this hyper environment we've got pounce. I mean, hey, we got Mark Pryor saying entitlement in reference to military service. Let's go. You know, and it's
got to be cautious as a journalist on that.
Right.
Yeah.
But, so I will not put Janelle on the spot on this because she's an impartial, objective news reporter here.
And we aren't.
And you guys aren't. So where do you sense the Cotton Pryor race is today? Who has the advantage today?
You want to go first? Advantage Cotton. Let's be serious. The Republican Revolution proceeds apace. It's all about Obama and Obamacare. Pryor's for it. Even when Pryor says something innocent, he's getting beaten up over it. Whereas Mike Ross can maybe localize the governor's race and do better. Right now, it's a nationalized race. Advantage Cotton pretty clearly. Pryor's task is not just to say he's an outsider, Cotton, but that he's kind of an oddball extremist. That's the case he has to make. But the only guy who's buying that I can see is me and a couple other people. Nobody's out there worried about this frightful Tom Cotton. For all the things I've written that they need to be, I don't see that penetrating yet.
I agree, advantage Cotton. That's not to say it's not a winnable race for Senator Pryor, but if he does win, I think it'll be one of the great political victories in modern Arkansas history because he will have done it swimming against this tremendous red tide that's been washing over Arkansas since 2010.
If you have Barack Obama and Obamacare around your neck and you win, that's a heroic political accomplishment.
He's in the top 5.
But he hasn't done it. He hasn't done it.
All right. Great roundtable discussion, y'all. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you for watching our roundtable discussion. You can keep up with the latest business and political headlines each and every day at talkbusiness.net or on KATV.com.